The director of the CIA has issued a grim warning to Congress that if Ukraine doesn't receive aid in time, it's going to cause a cascade effect around the globe. Just what is he saying to Congress? And is Ukraine still pushing back on the front lines? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So first off, quick frontline update. Again, Russia's vaunted breakthrough still not happening. In fact, actually, Russia losing a little bit of ground outside of Bodanivka. You can see here is Bakhmut, so it's a little bit northwest of Bakhmut. Just getting Russian forces being pushed out of this small windbreak here, and of course, in exchange, the Russian forces seizing a kind of an empty field, actually almost the exact same length of windbreak. You can see it right here outside of Novelsky. So a lot more tit for tat. And supposedly, some analysts think this is a sign that the Russian offensive, Russia's declared victory, so to speak, in its offensive, right? They're saying, hey, we've taken Avdiivka, we've taken a few of the surrounding villages prior to Putin's election, and that itself is a sufficient victory for the Russian armed forces, and that they're now going to be reconstituting, preparing to raise new divisions, preparing to equip them, scaling up Russia's defense industrial base, while this election happens. And then in the spring or fall, we're going to see a renewed Russian offensive. Now, though, the problem is that Ukraine's likely doing the same thing, but the difference is there's not a large industrial country backing up Ukraine, right? The way that the Russian military is backed by the Russian government. Now, this is, of course, leads to my next discussion, which is CIA director and bad mustache haver. I mean, look at this dude. Really? Nobody at the CIA was like, Will, guy, please no. Well, in addition to a sketchy, questionable mustache decision making, he seems to have a much better grasp of the geopolitical situation within the world. And here's the thing, guys. Remember, the CIA, they can offer their analysis of a situation, but they can't tell you why. But we know that when the director speaks publicly, it comes from a place with a lot of information. Does it mean he's always right about everything? No. But this is someone who has access, they're not reading some tweets and giving their hot take. They're not reading some shitty podcast and being like, this is how it is. This is someone with access to high-level signals intelligence. This is someone who probably has listened to Russian high command meetings, or at least read translated transcripts of the meetings that take place in the Kremlin. This is someone who likely has, knows things about high-level Chinese officials and their opinions and their stances, things that as civilians, we would never in a million years have access to, right? So when they say that, when they make these assessments, they come from a place of a lot of information. And one of the things he is weighing in on is the $60 billion in supplemental funding for Ukraine as part of that $100 billion security aid package. And Burns said, quote, "It's our assessment," this is the CIA's assessment, "that with supplemental assistance, Ukraine can hold its own on the front lines through 2024 and into early 2025. Again, the CIA has good analysts. They are using very powerful analytic tools, likely, almost certainly a proto-AI. I know for sure they've had a proto-AI. They were, I guess I can put this out. I'm a civilian. They were actually the earliest investors into Palantir. This was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And basically, because the CIA funneled money into Palantir, they said, listen, we'll give you the funds to develop this tech, but you have to keep it private for at least 5 to 7 years so that the U.S. intelligence and security community can use this tool before anyone else can. And Palantir took that money, right? And now, obviously, they're a vaunted AI company, part of this big AI revolution. But again, in 2005 or 6 that the CIA brought Palantir into the fold. So I say this because when you see these assessments, please understand that it's done using tools and capabilities that are right now just like theoretically possible. Again, imagine if I told you what AI can do in 2005. That's the sort of tools that the CIA would have access to. So again, when they assess these things, this isn't like me being like, probably 2025. No, like this is a model. This is a detailed model about what Russia can do and what Ukraine can do. And that's early 2025 is a serious window, right? It gives Ukraine opportunities to not just resist Russian advances for its own sake, but if you're going to negotiate with a counterparty in a war, you want to do so from a position of strength, right? Russia right now has no incentive to negotiate. As discussed, they're rebuilding their forces. They are getting ready for the next attack. They know that Ukraine can't rebuild their own forces nearly as fast. So Russia is just empty talk. They are finally have the offensive in their favor for the first time in 2 years. They have no intention of signing any peace deal other than an unconditional surrender by Ukraine or something comparable to that. So even if you are like, hey, this war's got to end, to sit there and say and demonstrate to the Ukrainian armed forces and to the Russians that, hey, you're not going to roll over Ukraine. You're not going to be able to achieve big victories, and you should probably think about negotiating. Because by 2025, hopefully the Europeans would be up and running in their aid programs. Now, Burns also thinks Ukraine could, quote, regain the offensive initiative, which is pretty vague. Offensive initiative can mean a lot of things. Probably in this case, he's referring to just like eking out territory from the Russian forces. I think at this point, even the CIA knows that the odds of a Ukrainian, like a stunning Ukrainian victory, sweeping aside Russian forces is pretty low, right? The Russians can't do it. Ukrainians can't do it. This war is just slower and sloggier. But here's what I thought was most important for a couple of reasons. First, it's because it's the exact same thing that I have been saying for the past 4 months since we've been talking about this supplemental aid bill. And again, it's not because I have secret information. It's because I understand the geopolitical calculus that happens inside the Pentagon, in Langley, in the high levels of government, right? Because remember, I was a fairly high-level official at DHS. I had access to a lot of high-level decision-making. And this is how this thing is done, right? These guys are paid to zoom out and look at the whole picture. He says, quote, without this assistance, it is hard to imagine how Ukraine will be able to maintain that extremely hard-fought advances it's made against the Russians, especially given the sustained surge in Russian ammunition production and purchases from North Korea and Iran. Meanwhile, Putin is increasing defense spending, and Russia is reversing its long-standing reluctance to devote a high percentage of GDP to the military as he looks to rebuild. Burns said a perceived loss in Ukraine would convince China that the U.S. is an unreliable partner to its friends and encourage China to bully neighbors and possibly attack Taiwan. This is what I've been saying. And the problem is that this is not a one-off, right? If the U.S. had one ally where things didn't work out and they lost, you'd go, nobody's friends with everyone forever, right? That's just human lives. But here's the problem. The U.S. made a pledge to defend the Afghan government, and even when they lost, we bailed on those guys, right? There was no plan to evacuate interpreters. Nope. We left the Afghan Special Forces guys in the lurch. We left all of our security partners in Afghanistan basically screwed. And we just opened planes and just let whoever roll into them. It was no plan at all. And it was a total embarrassment of our allies. Then we did the same thing to the Kurds. The Kurds are the U.S.'s most staunch ally in the Middle East. They have asked for almost nothing in return for their unvarnished support of the United States. And when push came to shove, we did nothing. We left them in the lurch against ISIS. When Turkey attacked the Kurds, we just simply went hands off, right? We said, oh, good luck. Good luck, guys. Turkey's a NATO partner. We could have easily told Turkey, hey, man, don't hit the Kurds. But we didn't. And so what is occurring, what Burns is pointing out is that there's a growing data set among U.S. allies and partners that the U.S. is not that reliable a friend. And that if you're someone like China, where they aren't subject to elections, right? There's not going to be Chinese elections and Chinese policy will reverse. China can do a 20-year campaign, right? China can sit there and be like, we're going to force everyone out of the South China Sea with military might. We're going to push them back because we know that if we do it for 24 months, the U.S. will leave. The U.S. will stop backing up its friends. They'll stop backing up Taiwan. All we have to do is fight for 24 months and the U.S. will get sick of it. And that's if the U.S. is only writing checks, small checks, 5% of its total defense spending, right? Small checks, and the U.S. won't do it for 2 years. The U.S. right now, again, William Burns probably has heard the Chinese actually talk about it. Like the Politburo has probably actually discussed this. China's likely saying, listen, the United States, they don't have the political strength to fund a war against their enemies for 24 months. 24 months and they're bailing. What are the odds that if the U.S. has to commit actual troops to a fight, that the U.S. is going to last for any more than 12 months? No chance, right? Can you even imagine the U.S. taking like Ukraine levels of casualties? Well, if China believes that the U.S. like won't defend, if China believes the U.S. won't back up Taiwan, then that's what we would look at. You know, you got to understand that the threat of force is the best use. Like the best thing the U.S. military does is exist and be big, right? Because it's powerful, right? You can't measure wars prevented by having a strong military that makes its enemies think twice. Right now, Iran, as we've seen, isn't really bothered by the U.S. military and its military actions, right? It has no problem funding Houthi rebels to blow up merchant ships. Like that's just routine business. And so the U.S. perception around the globe is already that it's kind of weak and that it's not going to be a reliable security partner to its friends. And major powers like China, obviously like Russia, if Russia knows that no one will back up Ukraine, they definitely knows they're not going to back up a non-NATO Caucasus countries, you know, Moldova or Belarus or pick your country. And so it's all, the risk of a cascade effect is just huge. Now, if you guys are interested in seeing how Ukraine is holding these front lines against the Russians, we do a deep dive into all of the week's viral combat footage. It's totally uncensored. YouTube absolutely hates it when I YouTube won't let me put any kind of combat footage. If a weapon fires, it can't be on YouTube, period. It'll get demonetized. And you won't see it. When you get demonetized, the algorithm kills the video. It gets maybe a dozen views an hour. If you're interested, so I put all those combat videos on Combat Vet News twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays they drop. And really, if you just want to support what I do, you see not many sponsors want to come on a channel that covers this, especially now. And so if you're interested, you can become a member, combatvetnews.com. Any one of these tiers will get you access to those videos, but I have so much appreciation for the lieutenant and the colonel tier folks. Now, there's one other point I wanted to talk about, so don't leave yet. And that is a statement by Zelensky. And I wanted to do a little bit of analysis on this because he said, quote, Ukraine would be interested in the presence of foreign instructors and technical personnel from partner countries on Ukrainian territory. And this is actually an interview with French media, Le Monde and BMF TV, BFM, excuse me. And he says, quote, it's no secret that Ukraine sends its troops abroad on training missions and artillery armored vehicles in the F-16. But when we send troops there, our boys return thanks to the training missions of other countries. They had to adapt in Ukraine and undergo several months of training here. This process takes twice as long. That's why let's shorten the time and conduct this training mission immediately in Ukraine, adapting immediately to the state of the war. Then I don't see anything like this, he said. Basically, he's alluding to getting NATO partners into Ukraine. This is sort of ridiculous. I don't think this is really the case. Well, it's understood that Ukrainian troops are doing a basic combat training in these other countries, learning how to operate their weapons or provide basic medical care. And then they have to undergo several months of what he's probably describing as like unit level training, where they'll say, okay, you were here, right? You have all these guys who completed their basic training. Now you have to do specialty training for your unit, or you train together, right? You learn how to fight with your squad, with your platoon, with your company, right? So it's not really taking twice as long. It's taking the normal length of time. But maintenance, we've talked about this in other videos where, yes, there is a need for maintenance and sort of what's called the logistical tail. Getting spare parts, ordering spare parts. You have to think that's really pretty technical to look at a complex aircraft like the F-16 and say, okay, what parts do you need? How do we get them? When are we going to need them, right? Because you can't wait till the F-16 breaks to manufacture the part in the United States or wherever it's being built, right? You've got to have sort of an anticipation of what you're going to need and when. It's really tough. And so it can be really helpful to have foreign partners do these things. But here's the thing. Is it really that different than to do it in the, across the Polish border inside a NATO country where those troops are totally safe? The reason I think Zelensky wants this is a pretty common situation for a lot of smaller countries that might that are not succeeding on the battlefield, is that their goal is to bring their allies closer into the fight. Very common. It literally shows up in Thucydides talks about it, writing about Athens in 300 BC. He talks about how smaller states, polities that are aligned with Athens, would oftentimes deliberately try to pull the Athenian navy into local disputes in order to use Athens' overwhelming power to settle local disputes once and for all. And Zelensky, I think, is trying to do a version of this. He's trying to pull the country, particularly France, closer into the war to increase the level of French support. Again, it's easy to imagine Russia saying, hey, NATO troops are in Ukraine now, but they're doing all this logistics work. And then they launch a missile strike at that base. And the French government says, listen, you can't kill our soldiers, guy. Like, you weren't, like, we were a neutral third party before, but now we're not. And then suddenly Zelensky has an entire second military joining the fight, which could potentially be a game changer for him. So I understand the tactic he's using. Very common, very well-trod territory. But I don't think realistically it's going to happen because NATO understands, listen, we can do the same things on the Polish side of the border where we are untouchable as we do within Ukraine itself. Anyway, that is all I had, guys. Thank you so much. As always, thanks to our Colonel tier members. And of course, the video is going to be dropping here in a couple of hours. So be sure to become a member and check the video out at combatvetnews.com. See ya.